Hey, Mattie, what are we talking about today?
It's results season, Michelle. The hard work is over. Now it's time for seniors around the country to figure out if and when how they're getting into schools. We're going to go over the entire timeline and I'll give a little bit of advice on how to handle it. Sound good?
Sounds good and exciting.
Let's go. Okay, it's results season. Yay!
Feels like Christmas Eve or something.
So there's definitely Christmas energy to results season, like especially when you've been doing this for many years and you're pretty good at it, and like you have like an actual data set. You're like, okay, I'm gonna. It's like it's a real mathematical Christmas, I guess. Like I could compare that to it did not feel like Christmas my first year doing this, and definitely not my second year when I was here back from Harvard and Stanford and Yale and Princeton and had no idea what was going to
Right.
happen. And part of my career is often I know what students are going to be stressed about and know why, because I was once upon a time stressed about those things and didn't know, not so much when I was applying to schools because I got into Tulane like early action and it was just kind of hang. But my first 2 years doing this, especially the second year, 'cause my first year I worked at a touring center, it was like UC Davis type,
Okay.
First year's College With Mattie, I'm in the big leagues. I'm trying to get kids into Harvard and Stanford and Georgetown and on and on and on and out of nowhere. And I was like a nervous wreck. It was bad.
Oh my gosh, I'm
And I know,
sure.
and over and over again while I was doing this, like, I wish I knew this. Not that I wish that everything would work out. That wasn't what I was hoping for. It's like I know, like I wish I had a better idea of what was going to happen and like how this was going to go down. And I kind of was like calling like in a couple of years, like I will have that information and that will make me way more chilled out, whether it's good or bad. And also like I will make a note to relay that to my students and the students around the world because God, I wish I knew that at the time. And that's what leads us kind of now to results season. And what I basically, it's about two parts to this. One is just some general thoughts I have about how results work for people to pick up. Then I've made a modified like admissions list. So what I did is I found a list of release dates on the internet that may or may have been not made by somebody else. I kind of cut it down to make a little bit more sense. I cut out some of their O Session 2s. And then I realized that it was like only 40% complete and added a bunch of schools around when they should be showing up. So we'll get to that. And I kind of talk about school by school how it goes. Like that's the goal of this is to just give a preview of what result season really looks like. Right. So I have some tops here is one, advice for students. Do your best to ignore results as much as you possibly can. So part of result season is there's really two ways results are going to show up. Either just suddenly you get an email or an alert or you hear they're like, oh, hey, this is up. Or like I email students and stuff's up. They haven't gotten back to me.
Right.
Um, or there's a very clear day and often a very clear time that it is going to be released. Those are the two ways it comes down. And in either case, there is nothing you can do to speed this process along. Like the results come out when they come out. Some students right now are getting interviews for schools. Spoiler, those aren't very important. That's why we're doing this instead of the interview episode today. I was considering both. Uh, Basically, it really is a hurry up and wait situation. There's not like don't try to be proactive. There's nothing you can do. Don't try to contact people. Right now, probably as we speak, the results are being handled by these admissions facilities, and they're going to report back when they're going to report back. So like that is the big thing
Hmm.
is just go on, keep living, like keep getting A's. If you like want to be proactive, just
Right.
continue doing well in your classes. If you want to be doing your club and everything, that's fine. But like what really matters now is getting A's because that's what makes sure this doesn't go bad. But that is general. I remember a lot of me remembers I'd be like, where is it? Like checking things over and over and over again. And
Hmm.
I'll show the calendar, and the dates are either like accurate and that they're confirmed, or like I've just guesstimated because this process is it repeats very similarly. And if you really want, I'll probably a better time. You can go back and look when things came out last year. If you want to, like, if it's a real school you're
Hmm.
really worried about or you're really curious about, just Google that school release date, admissions release date 2023 or 2024, and see when it came out. And then that's very close to when this is going to come out this year. Like it's not that crazy.
Okay.
Um, Two, state schools tend to be jank. I suppose I'll get to this in the chart, but looking over the chart and trying to color coordinate it. Oh, I color coordinated the chart, Michelle. Like
Oh my
I know,
God.
it's a big deal.
Wow.
Yeah, that is probably the biggest, difference I found is that private schools tend to be very well organized and they tell you what day it's going to come out. And at worst, they don't tell you what time, but often they tell you the day and the time.
Right.
And then there's a port and everything. State schools are just kind of a mess. And I think this is just a testament to I would much rather be a private school admissions officer than a state school admissions officer because, like this whole podcast was influenced by yesterday. The University of Texas, which I will get to in the chart,
Okay.
sent an email to everyone who applied early action to Texas. And in theory, when you apply early action to Texas, you should just hear back early.
Right.
But I could do an entire episode on the University of Texas admissions. It's like Texas and USC are the two that I was like, dude, something's up. But everyone got an email that says, thank you for meeting our early action deadline. The Office of Admissions is thoroughly reviewing your application for your selected major, and we need some additional time. No further action is needed on your part. You can expect to receive your admissions decision on February 15th.
What?
Yeah. And on one hand, that's somewhere between goofy and embarrassing and unacceptable. On the other hand, that's like seems kind of early for me for Texas to get back to people because Texas sends people back in waves, and in theory, they like let Texas students know first, but then they don't. That's the big thing is if state schools are like double number one, like don't try to pay attention to it. Like state schools in particular, just kind of they're on their own timeline, often because they have limitations that private schools like don't have, and that
right.
And generally, in due to lack of resources, the only way is more time. So that's. Yeah, 3 years is I deleted there's early decision 2, which is its own beast. Basically, take any school, which is usually going to report back earlier than that, a month or two. That's to check the timeline. So if you have an ED2 school, do know come back earlier. You should probably check when they released their ED2 results last year.
Okay.
And figure that out. This is primarily there's some early action stuff at the beginning of our timeline coming up. But mostly this is the regular decision results that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
4, and this is where we get more into actually how to handle this process. So a line I like to say is that admissions is a ladder. Some pyramid might be closer. You can tell me, but like if you want me, like there should be a little caveat here. Is like don't read the tea leaves too much of any of these results. You know, like every result is a result in of itself. It doesn't pay to be like I got into this school. That means I will or won't go into the next one.
Right.
It's not that simple. However, if you would like to play along, my experience with many students is that basically, as we'll get to, the results tend to go from easy to difficult. And as difficulty goes up, students they get in, right? So we start at the easiest schools, and we'll get to the timeline. They get into all the really safety backup schools. Then they also get into all like the mid to somewhat difficult state schools like Michigan, Virginia, etc. Then they also get into the round after that, which is kind of like your Georgetown, Berkeley, USC. But then they don't get into Johns Hopkins. They don't get into Duke. And then they tend not to get into any more difficult school than that. That is generally how it works, that students do very, very, I think pyramid's probably closer. They do very, very well as we move up the difficulty curve until they start striking out over and over again. And in that scenario, it is much less often than not that I'm double negating myself like a sports announcer. It is not very common that they say YOLO a Ivy League or they YOLO a top level school after that, outside of a Cornell, which tends to be more of a similar difficulty. So that's probably the best way if you want to read the tea leaves. Do not trust any one school because the students who are getting into this thing, the students getting to Stanford and Harvard, they tend to get into like Georgetown and USC and this and this and this and they didn't get into Berkeley. That's weird because they're out of state, right? But like that's if you want to be at home, like tracking your results. What does this mean for the schools that you like very likely care more about? That is the best kind of consultant tea leaving I can give you because that's how I have seen it and how I have seen it work with my students pretty much more often than not. Yes, there are absolutely outliers, but much more common is the student who is an outlier who like gets in. I remember there was a student who got into Yale, and it was pretty shocked. Like I got that kid into Yale. Like sorry, I'm not supposed to say that. I'm not supposed to say that. I'm not supposed to say I got no. Like come on. Like I'll tell you. You don't know him. I'll tell you the story. But like, oh my god. Well, that student was overperforming the entire way. He did get into Georgetown and Swarthmore and on and on and on and on in a way that I found surprising at the time. I was very impressed. I was like, and then he also got into Cornell and Yale at the very end. So it still matched the pattern that I have seen, even if it was surprising along the way. More results is that you will likely get into the vast majority of your safety and target schools. Yes, they are safeties and targets for a reason if you've chosen them correctly. This one's always hard because my students tend to do very, very well at the bottom of the pyramid, say. Our students, I always correct myself. It's our students. It's our students. Our students do very well at the bottom, the middle of the pyramid, and then tend to segment into 2 tiers. One is they do okay in kind of that I keep mentioning that third range, that USC Berkeley tier,
Right.
and then pretty often get cleaned out at the Ivies and like the top level schools, Stanford, or they dominate those schools, except for USC if they don't get in because students don't get USC a lot for some reason. But they do better than the Group A, and then they are the ones who are hitting at the top level. So, but that's the thing is like if you pick your safety targets correctly, like that's why safety targets and reaches are real, like they're real, and I beg the student to find me this. This is a different rant, but I beg a student to find the person who's like not getting into UC Davis, they're not getting into Middlefield College, but then they're getting into Cornell, then they're getting into Duke, then they're getting. That student doesn't exist. Like the peer, it's not a ladder; it's a pyramid. I've had this rant with students multiple times, but it feels more like it's more dramatic if it's a ladder. Like that's the thing. You don't climb a pyramid. It's a ladder inside a pyramid. Yeah. So like, in general, this one's also, I guess, a little bit biased because my students have always done very well, but also they've had our support. They are often very strong students in the first place. But if you size yourself up correctly, in general, these results should not shock and bewilder you, good or bad. Like I've had more students that I was shocked positively than negatively. Like this process,
Yeah.
when the results actually come out, and don't trust me, go watch college like acceptance videos. I'm going to do an entire episode on college acceptance videos because they're fascinating in how much they showcase. Don't take them to just like manifest, like because you can watch them from previous years just to get a good idea of what it really looks like to like have these results come back. And if you're a strong student, and the type of students I like to work with, you have your high GPA and you've worked hard and your essays are good. Well, go watch those college acceptance videos, and you'll see. Yes, they do get into really good schools because if they didn't, they wouldn't have posted a video. And one of my favorite like jokes is that there's video everywhere of hard drives of students who didn't get into top schools, and like I think it's hilarious. But if they get into the top ones, then yeah, good for them. But just pay more attention to how the results come out and just what a high hit rate they have, and it should very clearly match what you do. Yes, everyone knows a cousin or a friend that had gotten nowhere, but then got into. But I've certainly never met that person. That's never been in my students. That's just not how it works. The students who do poor, like I cannot think of a single student who did poorly, and then YOLO'd out like a really great school.
Okay.
And maybe that's because the vast majority of my students do really well building up and then also do well. I don't have many students that don't do well in the first place, but yeah, like there is logic and order to it, and like that is something that I am really glad having done this multiple times. Yes, I'm happy with the results. That really helps. But more than anything, I found this process does make sense. Like there is logic and order to it in a way that it helps me sleep at night. I don't worry that much about it. And I know how much I did not sleep well about it in 2021 or so when we were first coming back. Now we can finally get into our chart. And I mentioned before that schools tend to report back roughly in the order of how hard they are to get into. Now we head on to the chart though, and I color coordinated. Michelle, do you know I'm colorblind?
I do remember that you mentioned that.
And when you're colorblind, holy smokes, did this take an embarrassing amount of time to make a really ugly, gaudy color coordinated chart. But we can basically run down the list here. So the schools in yellow are state schools. And these all kind of follow the same basic premise where the dates listed on the right are closer than not. If it says confirm, it's confirmed. Like Georgia Tech and UIUC tend to be legitimate. Michigan is okay. UVA is okay. UT Austin is a nightmare. Like UT Austin shows up whenever it's going to. The rest of these,
it's crazy.
The rest of these, they tend to report back. However, I guess I'm just going with the schools that matter. Like Michigan reports back if you get into the school. However, does not report back if you got I know there's a student last year who was trying to get in the business school. I don't know if they don't tell you if you got in for your major necessarily. They'll tell you if you got into a specific school, an addendum to that. However, if you are accepted at the University of Michigan, especially if you're out of state and you apply to the business school, they're probably going into the business school was my logic last year. And I was correct because that'd be a really weird thing to do. Yes, similarly, yeah, it's UT Austin. It's just like then there are state schools are just very messy because there's often like specialized programs at them, honors colleges. And my experience is the actual school usually like takes a sweet time towards back, but then you're waiting to see if you got into the UT CS honors program or the Virginia, the UVA Jefferson scholarship. Like a lot of them have these bells and whistles that with the private schools often have them too, but they report back either the same, like the exact same time or very soon after. State schools, there's no promises of when you're hearing what you're getting. It's just the nature of how they operate. Then I put the University of Southern California here. This is when their early action reports back. This used to be the USC merit deadline, where if you were getting a scholarship, that's when they let you know. Now they report back early action. If you don't get in, you're likely to be deferred. It's different because USC changed their policy because USC is run by weirdos. They changed their policy to essentially have early action. You'll be hearing back then. If not, you will likely be deferred, and that's for, I guess, a different topic. But basically, I don't think they were. USC, I don't know, but that's when USC comes back. That's why it's purple. It's its own thing. Yeah, like quite honestly, especially for me and for us, like result season starts generally with Michigan, Georgia Tech, and USC. Like those are the big ones because those are the three big schools that a lot of students apply to early that they're now hearing back from. And then Texas shows up whenever it shows up. Right, now we move on to March 7th here. So, and that's when UC Davis reports back. And I consider the real, you viewed up above it, I consider the real beginning of results season to basically be when the first UC gets back to people. And that seems to switch up from whenever it's going to be. It's usually a lower tier UC. And we can see here that so far, like no like major heavy hitters. Probably Michigan early action is like the biggest school that's reported back. I guess USC early. We're still in the early. Now we're in regular decision. Like Davis is like the first notable school that I find that reports back. You'll see Ohio State here, Georgia Tech RD, but don't apply RD to Georgia Tech. You know. Then you have RPI, Colorado College. These are all you can see probably lower difficulty, lower prestige level schools. And that's how this goes. It's a slow trickle. It reminds me of Mardi Gras. I went to school in New Orleans, and like kind of reminds me of like there's like that's probably like the pre parade stuff where it's like, oh, it's Crew to Barkus. There's dogs now, and you're like, okay, when's the real parades? Well, the first big one is the University of Chicago, which reports back on March 10th, 2025. And coming in a few weeks, I'm filming this with you next week. Is they do this because they're like full of engineer human engineering like weirdos that are I've called two school weirdos. UC and UC are both run by weirdos. Like it's just a fact. And UT Austin. Those are three schools that are run by weirdos, but very different weirdos. They do that because it will. We'll save it for the U Chicago episode. It doesn't matter why. However, it's so they can waitlist their entire class load and then give them weird phone calls to see if they want to come or not. But probably more interesting is Caltech and MIT. These are real. This is because MIT wants to be released on March 14th at Pi because like they're not like other schools, Michelle.
Right.
They're not like other schools. MIT, like they do something different over at MIT. Caltech's right before that. That will either be a huge deal for some students or not that important for most. It basically do not put too much credence, good or bad, into your Caltech / MIT results. And if you apply regular decision, you Chicago, that either. Like there's absolutely students who will get into Stanford, Harvard, like will clean up, who do not get into Chicago, Caltech, or MIT. Neither of those three are very good metrics to going forward because they're so different. Then I have down below, it's like Middlebury College, Wesley College, McAllister College. Yes, over the next week, this is where I cut a bunch of schools I never really didn't think about. There's endless schools right here where all of your non-top 50 schools and all of your non-top 10 liberal arts colleges, basically, this is where they all report back to you. Basically the middle of March in this case. And they're doing that because they're trying to cut the line, essentially. So a lot of schools, it's in their best interest to give you a big shiny acceptance as early as possible, and possibly to send you some merit scholarship that is of varying realness and like value, I would imagine. But yeah, I think it's marketing. I think a lot of these schools, especially liberal arts colleges, but also like Santa Clara is going to report back around now. Like your less prestigious privates, like you get the idea. Like schools that need your money. Let's be honest here. It is very much a marketing tactic to get back to you. Try to be like the first few people to get back to you, and then like tell you how great you are, and like send you a nice like handwritten letter or something because they want your money.
Yeah.
If you are very excited about these schools, that's wonderful. If not, do not fall for the trap. Like these schools are not that difficult to get into, quite honestly. Every year I have a couple students report back from these schools. I didn't even know they applied there. So I don't have like, then we get to Santa Barbara. coming up into now like March 20th, we have Santa Barbara, Hopkins, San Diego comes a few like the beginning of this week is where things get very interesting very quickly actually. So like there's basically about a week and a half of kind of like your lesser tier schools. There's Santa Barbara, but then there's Amherst, and then there's Johns Hopkins, and then there is Williams, Swarthmore, Bowdoin, UC, and then UCLA. And these are all actually coming out within a 2-day period, which is exciting. This is when things get really fun and exciting for me. Like this is the beginning of big time result season, and I wouldn't be shocked like your Williams, Swarthmore, and Bowdoin and Amherst. They're playing us, and Hopkins. They're playing a somewhat similar game, just on a higher level to like the Middleberries and the Wesleys of the world. It behooves them to get out these results to their best and brightest with as many bells and whistles as they can, because those same students, by nature of having the goods for a Williams or a Swarthmore or a Johns Hopkins, have a very good shot at top schools. And this is where I start really kind of tracking the results of my students, because they've gotten into all the schools leading up to this point, like usually with a 100% clip. But if a student is getting it, like let's say a student applied to Amherst, Hopkins, Williams, Swarthmore, Bowdoin, if they get into Bowdoin, Williams, and Johns Hopkins, that's great news. Like that is very exciting. If they get into none of them, that's bad. Like maybe that's closer to the truth. Is like if they get into like none of these schools, it suddenly becomes very, in my experience with my data set, it becomes very unlikely for me to believe they're going to do much better. Like they may not. That doesn't mean they can't still score within like kind of that tier, because we'll get to that. But it's hard for me to believe that kid's going to get into Stanford. They're going to get into Harvard if they did not get into Amherst, Hopkins, Williams, Swarthmore, Bowdoin. Then Berkeley and UCLA come out. That's always, I think, important note for out-of-state students. You will likely not get into Berkeley or UCLA. It's very difficult. Every year I have out-of-state students who don't get into Berkeley, don't get into UCLA, and they're like, am I doomed? And I go, no, it doesn't mean anything. It's just like, it's really hard to get in. You weren't going to go anyways. If you're in-state, I believe if you're in-state, you should be getting into Berkeley and UCLA if you have a good shot at the top programs. I keep saying Stanford, Harvard. Those students have always gotten into Berkeley and UCLA from the state of California. Out-of-state students, much hazier. So don't put a lot of stock into those results, though, if you're out of state. Then this is where I just kind of went in and put a bunch of schools in. I don't know these are actual dates. I just really approximate. But then there's a real week where it kind of happens, and it's kind of the same time as your Hopkins and your Williams, is that WashU, Rice, NYU, USC, Vanderbilt, Carnegie Mellon, Northwestern, Emory, and Barnard. They all come out about 2 to 10 days before Ivy Day. And it's all during this big craze. And this is probably like the most the most exciting. It's probably the most fun part of the year for me, because it's just I get a lot of students who are getting into WashU, Rice, NYU, USC, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, and it doesn't like, this is where you can be tea leaving. Like you want to be getting into these schools, I promise. If you really just want to go to Yale or Princeton or Dartmouth or whatever, like you do want to be hitting on probably at least half of these, like I would say like that's a fair target. Maybe 45%, like schools in this range, which I've just been listing for the last 5 or 6 minutes. Really, like in my experience, the students who do get into multiple Ivy League schools, they do get into Duke, etc. They are hitting on over 50% of the list of the area of Emory, Northwestern, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, USC, NYU. Whereas some are hitting more like a 70 or 80% clip. They just keep collecting them, and that is just because they have a strong application that's the best way I can describe it. So however, also do be happy if you get into these schools. I'm always thinking ahead. However, it's a real good place to be if you do get a Rice or a Carnegie or a Vanderbilt. They take a lot of stress off you. And I'll kind of get to, I wrote the note down, the good and bad way this can go. Then there's Barnard. Then we get to Ivy Day. And if everyone doesn't know, Ivy Day is a real day. Apparently it's March 27th, 2025. Every single Ivy League school releases their decisions for all students at the exact same time. It's pretty cool. It's real. Get your popcorn ready. I the showman in me likes the way college results come back. The human and friend of teens, dude, come on, guys. Could you this process is just build up. It really is an event. And then after Ivy Day is usually almost the day after is Stanford. Duke tends to come either the day of or day after Ivy Day as well. But that's always as I know it is Ivy Day and the day after Stanford, and then the cleanup crew is around for result season. I always yes. So let's talk about the 2 ways this tends to go, Michelle. And luckily with my students, I think the majority of students, the good way. The good way is you start collecting dubs, and it's a fun, kind of exciting process where you're like, okay, cool. I got into UT Austin. Great. If everything goes bad from here, I'll go to Texas, I guess. Then that upgrades to like, oh, I got into Michigan. Cool. That's actually a decent school, right? Oh, wow. I got into, well, if you get into Caltech or MIT, you're swagging, but like, look, that doesn't happen. Like, oh, cool. I got into Hopkins.
Oh, definitely.
And I'm going to tell no, I got time. I got time for one story. The single funniest moment of my career is I had a student, you may have met her. It was her first year when you're doing like the EC stuff, but she applied to like 25, 30 schools, total overachieving CS lass who wanted to like have every shot. And the way things tend to work is for the first, like 2 or 3 schools, I really know we really talk about them. But like, then schools 3 through 12, but like sometimes we're just applying to schools because they say they have a very easy application and like it's a good school. And one of those schools was Johns Hopkins. And this girl was reporting back her results. And that's what I have students do. I have students email me every single result they get. And that's why I give feedback. And their email basically, she sent back all these schools. And it was what we talked about. So she's like getting into a bunch of smaller schools. I think maybe she didn't get into Amherst, et cetera. But then I get an email back. We say like, okay, big news is I didn't get into Berkeley. Is this like going to be a big problem? Also, other results. I was accepted to Johns Hopkins, and I believe she said Ohio State.
Oh my gosh.
And I immediately responded, "You have no idea what Johns Hopkins is, do you?" She wrote back like, "What? Is it good?" I said, "It's the number 7 ranked school in America." And then she replied like, "Wait, hold on." And then she's like, "Okay, that's really exciting."
Oh my gosh.
The big news is I didn't get into Berkeley. Like, no, you're in Texas. It doesn't matter. But like, also results. Yeah, it was like Ohio State and Johns Hopkins. So my acceptances. But yeah, that's how it can feel. Is if you really want those, appreciate and be excited when you get those duds, because there's really like it's 2 different things. One is I've been talking about like it's good news moving forward, but also you really should take a second to appreciate the work you've done and feel satisfied and proud of yourself that. Well, yeah, it's like if let's see, it's like even if the bottom falls out, like I get in here, cool. Like that is a really nice moment for, I like to think pretty much all my students along this path, because we apply to so many schools, is that like, yes, this may not be the best thing ever. They may not get exactly what they want. However, there's going to be a school, there's a tipping school of some sort that you see it and you go, okay, like okay, fine, right? Like I'm going to college now. Great.
Exactly. Like I'm good with this result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Obviously I want better, but like I'm not worried about telling people, like whatever that means to you as at home student. Like it's okay if you feel that way. I'm the guy who says like it's okay to be not want to be embarrassed by your like all that stuff is real. So like that school where you can go like, okay, fine, like great. Really take a second and appreciate the work you put in, because that means that like that's real. Like that's a cool moment that I get to share with students, and I kind of tell them that. It's like I say like you have 1 college admissions. It's like it's not going to go bad. Like, you're not going to lose it. So and that will likely happen to the vast majority of students. It really will. Right. So now, so that's the good way. And then that leads up to, if you keep collecting dubs, well, there are no promises. I've had students who go dub, and I've used this line before, like college admissions difficulty does not go like this. It goes like that. And right here, that's Berkeley's about here. Like Berkeley is right before takeoff. And then we go straight up. Berkeley here, you have USC here, you like all the schools I really like, your Rice, Vanderbilt's actually here, but like Wash U, Vanderbilt, no, Wash U, yes, but then you have Northwestern, and then we head up into the Ivies. That's what leads to Ivy Day, which is, yes, like no promises. I've had students who have done very well. It's more that in hindsight, students who get into these schools, I look back like, oh yeah, they got into every single school leading up to it. That's cool.
Right.
I'm sure there are exceptions that I'm not remembering right now, but that is generally, Cornell's going to be the easiest of them to get into. I've had students that do really well. It's a ladder. Like just because you can climb the next rung doesn't mean you're going to. It is much more if you don't. That's why it's a ladder. That's why it's a ladder. Because if you don't, if you lack the rungs, right? That's why you're climbing a ladder. It's like, there's no guarantee there's another rung above you. However, if the rungs go out, my experience is you can't go any higher than that. Like that's why it's a ladder. I've given this exact rant a dozen times to students. I figured it out, Michelle. That's why it's a ladder, not a pyramid. Yeah, and like so that's the cool way though. But it's like you have those rungs. more often than not, with students cleaning up all the way, yeah, they do get into a top school. They do get into multiple top schools, and it's very exciting. So like, that's the cool way. The not so cool way is if you're not getting into these schools. And I've had this happen once that I really remember. Probably one more time that's less scarring. However, like that's a rough ride.
Yeah,
and that's probably the least. That's the least fun version.
Sounds awful.
That's the least fun part of like what this process can be. My guess, like if some students find themselves in that situation, is like hold tough and keep going, because yeah, it's happened and it's brutal. Like that's probably the worst part of the situation is if you're not getting into those schools. I don't know what to tell you, because it's the opposite is also true. Like you don't get that net, but also yeah, like it's looking less and less. And I was like, the really cynical idea is like the student who doesn't get anywhere. It's like, okay, well maybe Stanford will pull out the bag tomorrow.
Right.
And, like spoiler, Stanford tends not to pull off the bag when no one else lets you in. Like again, that everyone's heard of that student. You don't want to be that student. I don't think that student's very common. It certainly hasn't been one of mine. So if it is happening, I guess hold on, because do you reconsider like the schools you have gotten into? Like you might have to prepare yourself. Maybe that's the thing, is like brace yourself. If you're not getting into Rice, you're not getting into NYU, you're not getting into Berkeley, brace yourself. You're probably not getting into the schools that are more difficult. Like that you might, and if you do, like send me an email, be like, haha, and I'll go, good for you.
But that's not normally the trend.
Right. So like don't get your hopes up that like there's some magic. Maybe that's probably the best advice. Like don't give your hopes up that there's some like magic element to this process where like the fit will be different. Like no, like that is not. This is me demystifying the college admissions process. It's like showcasing like sometimes it's just mean and like shitty. Like there's not a lot of magic to it. It's like I could prefer that logic. Maybe it helps me so that there is this like pretty reliable logical path from all the results, and as I've seen them, that the universe, like it really does make sense over and over and over again. Like that is my experience with these processes, that even if the results are bad, and they have been bad for my students, they're logically bad. So
yeah.
Okay, Michelle, that's and then you do wait lists. Also, you'll be waitlisted to like at least a quarter of schools or whatever, and you'll need to do an LCI. That's for a future episode. But
gosh,
like,
yes. Oh, and then students who are like deferred are also finding out at this time too.
Right? Oh yes, deferred from. That's a great point. Yes, if you were deferred in your early school, you will hear back during the regular decision timeline as if you were applying normally. And I've had, last year we had a student, definitely one wonderful young man. He was deferred from Brown and then was accepted in regular decision. Back in 2020, I had a student who was deferred from Georgia Tech, who then got in regular decision. That's it. So it's probably looking at something like 2 for 30 in my career. I don't know. I'd have to go across the numbers. 2 for 25.
Could you ever get deferred and then waitlisted? Does that ever happen?
Michelle? Well, you're gonna have to save that one, because I got the school for you.
Oh, okay, cool.
But, like for that to happen, you'd have to be not accepted multiple times. I wonder why what school would want you to do it. Next time. Okay, well, I think that's good for the code. And yes, we'll be checking in more as we get closer about what you to do for deferrals, for waitlist, because the LCI stuff, like, if you're waitlist, the game's not over. Maybe that's for a future episode, and we'll get to that next time. And after we talk about Chicago, I'm excited. See you next time, Michelle.
Oh, God. Okay, see ya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching College with Mattie. For more information or a coaching session with Mattie, visit collegewithmattie.com. You can follow College with Mattie on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Tune in next week for more episodes, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.